Last time we did an interview was on the podcast when you were right on the cusp of releasing new material for the first time in almost 18 months, I think. Since then, you've released 3 new singles. How has that impacted your perspective on where the band is at creatively and where it's moving forward creatively?
Geez, oh, that's a good. I'm not saying it, but we're both thinking it. I think we're in a time where you didn't have to be shackled by being a certain thing. I think the lines have been blurred a bit because there's so much access to things, right, via TikTok and all that, where it's literally like right there. There's so many things that get through to people. So I think it's like nobody just listens to one band. So I think you're allowed some creative freedom in terms of sort of dipping your toes into other sort of areas and other genres. I mean, at the core, it'll always be like what we are and what we always have been, which is guitars and bass and drums and all that. But I think we've been afforded the sort of creative freedom, if you will, to kind of venture into trying new things that perhaps before we wouldn't have tried. At least that's where I think we are.
Yeah.
Nice. What you say?
It's interesting as well, because although I was saying there at the beginning that it had been 18 months since you released pretty much, you had those tunes for a while and you had been sitting on them for a while.
Yeah. And you'd heard them a while before.
I had heard them a wee while. I mean, what impact does releasing them have on the journey that you have with the song itself? Like when you take it from demo to final master, does that journey feel complete without releasing it, or is that a part of it? You know what I mean?
I think it's definitely like a part of it, putting it out, but for me that's almost like the end part of it. Like that's where I let it go anyway. Like I feel like I live with it a lot and listen to it a lot, it being any song that we work on or demo or record, right through every phase of that process up until the day it comes out, even once it's sent off, but then once it's out, it's kind of out and there's nothing else that I can do with it, or that, you know what I mean, it's handed over at that point to the listener, for me anyway, and that's when that's like the end of its journey for me. But I certainly think over the last kind of year and a half, a key part of that process, i.e. playing it live in a room with people, has been missing. So I feel like for those last 3 releases, there's been one part of that still missing, which hopefully tonight, if we play them, we'll kind of finish that off, you know.
I mean, that's interesting too, because the last time I saw you live was at Assembly Rooms, which was your biggest headliner at that point. Now, again, here we are at another biggest headliner, you know, moving on from that, bigger again. How does your headspace compare right now to where it did at this time before Assembly Rooms?
I mean, mine's is a bit different because it's been
so long.
18. Well, it's been longer than that, hasn't it? Has it been like 20 months? Been like 20 months, I think. So that's weird, I know, which is it's almost a year and 8 months, almost.
It's definitely different in that way.
So it's weird that just the whole protocols and everything that you just feel a bit like out of touch with, and also people coming to see it. Like, I mean, it has been X amount of time, and I mean, people bought these tickets like 20 months ago. So yeah, I think there's the element of that, like, and everybody will be in the same boat. And the problem is, it's not just that, you're also fighting COVID. So you're also fighting people go, oh, well, am I going to go or am I not going to? Do you know what I mean? It's you're fighting that. Even though everything's allowed now and that, there's definitely people that are still going to be a bit sort of scared of getting back out there.
Fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? Which is fair enough. I mean, I get that.
I think it's different as well, comparing it directly to Assembly Rooms. Obviously, we're from Edinburgh, and that was an Edinburgh show, whereas this is to more people in a different city, so it's kind of like that aspect of how different might it be to that show, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating what you're saying as well. You're kind of both touching on it, that idea of people maybe being a little bit frightened to go out because COVID very much is still a thing and it's there. I may be looking a little bit too deep into it, but how do you kind of navigate that morally from the band's perspective when you're kind of trying to get people to come down to the show, but at the same time you know there's a good chance that they might?
I know it is a weird one. I mean, the problem is we can only go on what we are allowed to go on, and we're allowed to put on the show, and we're obviously you have to wear, it's mandatory now, you wear a face mask when you come in, and you do X, Y, and Z, and so the I think relevant protocols are in place to protect people as best.
It's also
as
like
you can,
the choice thing, you know what I mean?
but it's still a choice. Like
Members
we're all
of-
getting, we're all
we've had friends
forcing-
and stuff that are like just
I know.
don't feel comfortable coming down,
Aye.
and that's totally fine. Like in that sense of the word, it's hard and it's a mixed feeling because we can't put it off forever. Do you know what I mean?
I know.
We need to play live. That's like a massive part of being a band. So as long as we can keep within regulations and I'll pause. I feel like as long as we're kind of doing what we're allowed to do and doing it as safely as possible, then that's all we can do as an artist, a band. And if people want to come, then great. And if they don't feel comfortable coming or whatever yet, that's totally fine as well, you know.
I know, and the thing is, it's like a lot of people like are able to get the vaccine now and stuff. And I mean, I think the reality is that we're going to have to get on with this. I mean, it's not going to go away by the looks of it. I mean, in fact, it's definitely not going to go away. But and it would appear, obviously, I mean, I'm not a doctor or anything, but based on what they're saying, if we could get it to like a flu, then we live with that normally. So I think it's one of them. I understand people's sort of reservations for not wanting to venture out yet, and I get that. But on the other side, I mean, it has been 20 months. People are double vaccinated. Like I'm double vaccinated, and Sam's double vaccinated. Like the band are.
Hate needles as well, still done.
No, the band are totally. So I think as long as you take the necessary protocols, life kind of does just move on, doesn't it? So that's my 2 cents on it.
To come back to the 3 singles you released this year too, the latter two in particular, very much exploring different soundscapes than you have previously. But if we look at the kind of grounding you had going into releasing these songs, you know, you've got those 8 initial singles there that kind of really well established the world of Retro Video Club and that sound that you've kind of defined. Do you ever feel in competition with almost like your own catalogue when you're releasing new music now when you've got such a solid base there, which you didn't, you know, when you would have been releasing the songs initially, right back at the beginning?
I think it's allowed us to, very grateful obviously, it's allowed us to sort of attain a certain level of achievement. So we've been fortunate enough to go to Europe and play songs and play Transmit and play in rooms this size. Like we've been fortunate enough to do that with what we had been doing. But I think anyone will tell you, like you have to kind of, I mean, I'll bat it back to you, right? How many stadium bands sound like the first album?
I don't think too many. What were you expecting?
Well, that's my point.
I'm thinking like 1975 Arctic Monkeys. Those are the kind of classic ones that come to mind.
Didn't sound anything like they did though,
Exactly,
did they?
yeah.
Again, I mean, even like biggest bands like your Coldplays and people like that are actually in stadiums worldwide. I think there's a point where they kind of break through into, well, that's just, I mean, it's just them. It's just what they sound like.
I think you could also look at the inverse of that. If you look at a lot of these indie bands that came out like in the mid-2000s who didn't do that, who didn't redefine their sound, they're now stuck kind of playing the same
There you go.
few hundred cap venues, you know?
Exactly. So I think it's just evolving. And I mean, it's a cliche, but you can never do the same thing and expect a different outcome.
At the same time, though, I don't think we're like there's an element of it production-wise. When we're demoing initially or coming up with concepts, it's not like we're like
No, I mean,
let's
it's
write
no
a totally different song
totally.
than
It's
the
not-
last one.
it's
We
not like
just-
that.
Whatever the idea kind of lends itself to, we've pursued more. If that makes sense.
What was the last creative breakthrough you felt like you had as a band?
Finding the we found this sort of synth sub thing.
Oh, right, yeah.
When we were in with Mark, and it was annoying because we only started it on, I think it was Disaster, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Aye. So it was the first one was Disaster, right? But we found this like synth sub, and like I've got this weird thing when I listen to music. Like I listen to, like it's like I can see a spectrum for like low end to high end, and I can feel things that are missing. It's weird whenever I listen to music. But this seemed to like
Fill that missing void.
Fill like this, and we were like, oh my god, what? Like,
Seen it all.
and it just, you know what I mean?
Completely.
It had a, well, I mean, he's just jealous because I've got perfect pitch as well. I've got perfect pitch and he hasn't. You know what I mean? So.
We'd answer that question with the same week. I feel like that we recorded Disaster and got this thing he's on about was the most like creatively diverse week. In the same week we recorded that, we did another song that was yet to be released, which is probably the poppiest sounding tune that we've done, with the kind of most obscure, heavy one, like on the first day, then onto that the next day. So it was kind of like exploring all these different sounds that lend itself to different stuff in the space of 1 week was quite a weird and fun experience.
I think sorry to cut you off there, but I think that like what's been really good about that is that like we could walk onto a stage still and we could still play all these songs and will play some of these songs tonight, but like it's no, if it ever gets to the stage whereby we're doing a Calvin Harris or that, where like just again we're standing with the decks and everything, then it'll have went too far, do you know what I mean? But so long as we're still,
I just want to see what that would look like.
I know, well, it would look great obviously, but it's so long as we're still wielding,
That's where Liam goes solo.
So long as we're still wielding the battle axes, then we're fine.
How it's interesting, you know, what you were saying about that week where you were going through all these different sounds. Is that ever tough to navigate? Kind of compacting all that progression into such a short space of time when you're in the studio.
I mean, it was split up in such a way though that we focused on the first song first, and the second. It's not like they were interleaved and like jumping between these styles. So we had like 2.5 days of solid, heavy, weird stuff, and then 2.5 days of like, right, let's make a really pop song. Like it wasn't like, so it wasn't hard in that way. As once you were fully in it, you were in it. It wasn't like we were jumping between. Obviously there was elements that run through all of our stuff that are kind of there all the time, but it wasn't like they were interleaved where you were kind of getting confused as to what mode you were in almost.
Mm-hmm. How does the atmosphere of the room, how does the atmosphere of the song then influence the atmosphere of the room? Like, was the atmosphere of the room in the studio quite different on day one compared to day 5 if you were completely in different styles?
I mean, it's long days. I mean, you can when you're going back to again, the hotel or the apartment or whatever, you're like, I'm tired.
I don't think it's like we're working on a dark song though and we're all sitting sad. Do you know what I mean? Like we're just excited about what we're making, and at the end of the day when you listen back to it, you feel good about
when you find something as well. When you find like, we'll take Disaster for example. We had the riff and it was sounding like, that sounds great. But then we had like
me, the guitar.
Like, so because of what had happened is I'd said,
I
really like, you should put someone in there, right? And
hold my beer.
We were playing about with stuff, and I was like, that needs to sound a bit weirder than that. And we played about with all these pedals, and we found just this cheap, like 20 quid pedal that Mark had, and he was like, run it through that, and it was like, that was just the sound. And then obviously we added that into the second chorus, and it was like
chorus.
Do you know what I mean? It was, the kids call it drop, second drop. If you were Calvin Harris, he would call it the drop. So we added that in, and that when we were doing that, you go through like spikes in excitement, I think, throughout the day. So like you'll be, if you're trying to figure out something, again, it's a bit like thinking about it, but then when you get a bit of momentum, and like you find you're like, and then like the room's buzzing, and do you know what I mean? So it's like spikes in momentum, I think, when you're
just carry through the process.
Totally, like it just goes, because you'll find someone else and you go, that's class, and then put that down, and it's just, that's kind of how it works, or certainly how it works with us anyway.
I mean, I know through having these conversations with you both in interview and outside of this that you're a band with drive and a band with ambition, a band with conviction. Kind of on on the other side of that, when was the last time you went through a moment of self-doubt in regards to your music at any point?
All the time.
Yeah, like weekly probably.
All the time, man. You have to be able to, it's very difficult the way, because it's like anything. I mean, how many times do folk go, tell me this new song that we've got, this new song, and then it's like, it's all right. And it's really hard to flick the switch between subjective and objective. Again, removing yourself as something that you've made is really hard, I think, and you do need external parties to ground you a bit. But I think in regards to that, that's plays a massive factor when you're thinking about kind of we've got this and we've got this and what if this doesn't happen, and we're quite bad for that.
Yeah.
Like we really like again overanalyze things and stuff. But maybe that's why we've managed to get to a certain level or whatever, and because we've been so like microscope at everything. I think a lot of people, I mean, maybe does take the enjoyment out of it, some aspects of it. Again, when you're like, right, and we'll have to do this and we'll have to make sure that this is this. And I mean, it's just constant.
It's been particularly difficult with the last period, do you know what I mean? 'Cause usually any self-doubt is gone when you walk on a stage
I know,
and everyone's singing your songs, do you know what I mean? That's when it's like, oh.
Great.
Whereas when you've then not had that side of it for the last however long, do you know what I mean? It's kind of been more difficult, I guess, that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys.
No, thank you.
Cheers, mate.